Hey gang, I wanted to review the concept of scale, which is presented to us in chapter 1 of our textbook, mostly on pages 2 and 3. And I wanted to use the example that the authors gave us by comparing three cities, Vancouver, Miami, and Boston, to help you understand why scale is important. All right, scale is a fundamental geographic concept. It's one that geographers use every day because it helps us make better comparisons between places. It helps us learn other places by comparing them to what we're used to or what we've experienced before. Right? Now, most people will compare places and landscapes using only their first-hand personal experiences. And that's the point the authors of our textbook are getting at when they wrote, and I quote, Vancouver, Miami, and Boston look very different. Because if you ask an untrained tourist to visit these three places, then ask them to compare them, they're going to report that each place is unique and none is anything like the other. Right? So let's compare these three. Let's get on the ground and compare these three. Right? So if we go and visit Vancouver, British Columbia, we learned that it is an ocean port city. It was founded in 1886, so it's a relatively young city. And today it is home to 640,000 people, and its greater metro area, which includes the city itself and all of the counties or space around it where there's suburbs that interact with the city. We have more than 2.4 million people. Because of its situation on the West Coast, Vancouver draws most of its immigrants from Asia. And not surprisingly, it is home to the largest Chinatown in North America. Vancouver is currently one of the fastest growing metro areas in Canada and in North America. So it is really going through its growth spurt right now. If you go to Vancouver and you walk around, everything is going to look and feel brand new because a lot of it is. Now let's compare that with Miami, Florida. Miami, Florida is situated in the southeast portion of the country. It is another ocean port city. It was incorporated right about the same time Vancouver was in 1896, but it had its big growth spurt during the 1920s, during what we call the Art Deco era. And that's where Miami gets all of its pastel colors, the Miami Vice color scheme, if you want. So it's still growing today. It's home, the city itself is home to about 500,000 people. But if you include the city and all of its surrounding suburbs, the metro area is home to more than 5.5 million people. Miami is the second largest city in the United States with a Spanish-speaking majority. So when you walk around downtown, not only are you going to have that Art Deco look, but you're going to hear a lot of Spanish spoken in the streets. And that's because of its situation. Miami draws a lot of its immigrants from the Caribbean, South America, and some from Africa. And now let's go visit Boston, Massachusetts. Boston is our third ocean port city. We know Boston is part of American history because it was founded in 1630, a long time ago, almost 400 years ago. And Boston experienced its huge growth spurt during the Industrial Revolution, during the mid-1800s. So, I mean, Boston is still growing today, but it had its real big boom, a lot of growth in the 1800s. And so when you go and visit Boston, you're going to see a lot of architecture that reflects that boom. The skyscraper is a little bit shorter. There's a lot of brick. There's a lot of, the streets are narrow. It's going to have a lot more of a European feel. And that's largely because Boston has drawn many of its immigrants from Europe. I mean, look where it's situated. It's situated in the Northeast. It's closer to Europe. Mainly, it's pulled immigrants from Ireland, Italy, and Portugal. And so those are the language you're going to encounter in the streets in Boston. Today, the city is home to almost 700,000 people. And if you include the larger metro area, we're talking upwards of 4.8 million people. Right? So from those three perspectives, yes, those three places are going to look very different when you're walking around the ground. And because all three places have a different climate, they're also going to feel different from each other. Right? But a geographer doesn't stop there. You know, what a geographer does is they change scales by zooming in and out. So if you want to think of them as zoom levels, when you zoom into a map or zoom out of a map, it kind of controls how we're thinking about these places. You know, if it helps you to think about it, the way a geographer changes scale is a lot like how a writer chooses a perspective to write from. You know, you were taught, you know, a writer can choose to write in the first person perspective, or a first person voice, where they're talking about, I did this, I did that, I'm going to do this. All right. They can speak in the second person or the third person omniscient, where they aren't part of the story anymore, but they're like some sort of omniscient being looking down to the earth, describing the events that are happening below them. And so that's kind of what it's like to change scale. And so if we zoom all the way out to the continental scale, that's where we begin to recognize, Vancouver, Miami, and Boston have a lot in common. And that's what the authors of our textbook are getting at in the next paragraph on page 2. You know, all three are ocean port cities. So they have ocean traffic and ocean vessels coming in and out. All three are cities that anchor major metropolitan areas that have more than 2 million people. All three attract tourists. All three attract immigrants. All three wrestle with traffic congestion. And all three, because of their size, have to deal and find a balance between meeting the needs of their wealthiest neighborhoods, who have X set of needs, and the needs of their most impoverished neighborhoods, which have Y set of needs. And so when you look at it at that scale, you can see these three places have a lot in common. Now, to wrap up, you know, neither one of those scales is better than the other. What we're trying to teach you is to look at places and landscapes, not at just one scale, but by zooming in and out and looking for what's important at different scales, at multiple scales. The ability to change scale and to make comparisons from multiple perspectives is important because it allows you to find the information that gets missed when you make comparisons using only one scale or one perspective alone. And that's what our authors and our textbook are getting at, and that's what I hope I've just conveyed for you. All right, gang, thanks for paying attention.